Welcome back. Let's update you now on a developing international story tonight. Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has announced in the last few minutes that government forces have now taken control of the town of Mekelle. That's the capital of the Tigray region. There were reports earlier today of heavy fighting between Abiy's forces and the Tigray People's Liberation Front. The weeks-long violence has displaced thousands of civilians, with many of them fleeing into neighboring Sudan. 3 AU special envoys met with Abiy on Friday to try and find a peaceful end to the crisis. Let's talk about the latest developments then with William Davison, Senior Analyst at the International Crisis Group. William, thank you so much for your time. So Abiy Ahmed says that his forces have retaken the city of Mekelle and that the focus now is on rebuilding. Does this news tonight render the conflict in the Tigray region ended, finished, done?
Well, what it is a highly significant moment in this federal intervention to remove Tigray's regional government and bring the leadership to justice. We could see it as maybe the end of the phase of conventional conflict. There has been reports of very heavy engagements, heavy fighting around the regional capital over the last few days. Today there was reports of bombardment this morning, but not that many reports of heavy fighting. This suggests that Tigray's leadership has left the capital, and there is the possibility that we will see continued armed resistance in the form of an insurgency. But of course, we do not really know what condition Tigray's forces are in or what its leadership's plans are now.
And Abiy, in that statement tonight, William, says that our focus now will be on rebuilding the region and providing humanitarian assistance while federal police apprehend the TPLF clique. How easy will that rebuilding be, given what you've just outlined about a possible insurgency further down the line?
Well, yes, that's the question, and that's also the question for the humanitarian issue as well. I think what we can say is that the federal government has successfully taken control along the main roads of the main cities in Tigray. But Tigray is a fairly rural location, so the federal government is not necessarily in control of all of the countryside. And again, we have to see what sort of resistance there will be, armed resistance from these displaced Tigray leadership. But we also have to see what sort of acceptance there is or otherwise from Tigray's broader society to what will now be a provisional government put in place by the federal government.
The other unanswered question as we sit here tonight with this announcement is about the extent to which civilians may have suffered harm or even been killed while that violence continued in Tigray over the past few weeks. Do you think that now that government says it's retaken Mekelle and driven the TPLF out, we'll be able to get an honest account of the crimes committed against civilians by either side?
I think we will see more information coming out over the next few days. As you know, there's been a complete telecommunications blackout, no access for aid agencies or the media, really, to the majority of Tigray. So as the federal government establishes control, presumably telecommunications will be returned and we'll be able to get a better indication of whether civilians suffered in aerial bombardments. Obviously, there's been reports of atrocities in West Tigray as well. There's also claims that there has been severe problems with the refugee camps for Eritreans in Tigray. If this situation stabilizes as the federal government establishes some control, we should get more insight into what has been occurring.
Let's take a few steps back, William, if we can, and talk about why the conflict came to be in the first place.
Well, the conflict sort of came to a head this year. There was a constitutional dispute over elections. Elections were delayed due to COVID-19. The federal government wanted to extend all government terms until delayed elections, but Tigray's government said that that was unconstitutional. They went ahead and ran their own regional election. The new Tigray government was then classed as unlawful, essentially, by the federal government. Tigray's government also said that the federal government had outstayed its term. So this really set the parties on a collision course. Going back to 2018, when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, Tigray's leadership lost a lot of power in the aftermath. There was also a lot of unresolved political issues. There was a lot of bitterness, allegations slung back and forth about the TPLF destabilizing Ethiopia, and then on the TPLF side about them being scapegoated for Ethiopia's problems. So that was the sort of political backdrop to this constitutional dispute that led to the conflict this year.
You're in Addis, or that's where you were the last time. We were able to follow some of your commentary on the situation in Tigray. I'm curious about the reasons behind Abiy's course of action, why he opted for a confrontation with the TPLF in the violent manner which we've seen now, instead of accepting the earlier offers and even the offer just on Friday where AU envoys travelled to the capital to meet him and try to find a peaceful way out of this.
Well, the point is here that we reached the end of peaceful politics. As I mentioned, we had this sort of power struggle that led to the TPLF's loss of federal power, and then in a huge amount of bitterness as sort of Ethiopia looked for a new political settlement, and essentially, the TPLF looked to find a new way to for it to be accommodated in a new political environment. Well, that all failed. And then we had, this constitutional dispute. There were fears of a federal intervention in Tigray, so they took what they call preemptive measures against the federal military. When it got to that stage and the federal intervention was launched, there has been absolutely no suggestion from the government that it's interested in a negotiated solution. Instead, it calls this a law enforcement operation. And its objectives very much still now will be to get hold of the TPLF leadership wherever they seem to have fled to, and to bring them to justice. So that's why the offers at mediation were rebuffed over the last couple of weeks or 3 weeks or so.
Do you expect then, William, final question, the handling of the situation in Tigray to leave a big stain on Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's reputation and legacy going forward?
Well, I think it's caused a lot of concern amongst the international community, obviously. There is no doubt that what the government calls a law enforcement operation has been carried out in a very ruthless manner. But ultimately, I think, if the federal government is able to proceed from here, successfully establish a provisional government and bring these TPLF leaders to justice, perhaps it will not be too damaging for their international reputation. If there is now a sustained insurgency from these Tigrayan leaders, if there is significant Tigrayan opposition to this imposed transitional government, well, then this ruthless military effort to enforce the law, that will cause continuing consternation amongst the international community, and that will harm the reputation and the relations of the federal government in Ethiopia.
William Davison, Senior Analyst with the International Crisis Group, thank you for your time tonight, sir.